Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. I'd like you to go back in time with me to the year 1941. And Daniel Mahoney, who spent the last 23 years living in France, arrives in New York City with his French wife and 2 children. And he's arrived there after spending 7 months under the German occupation. And he's arrived there after going through episodes that would make the movie Casablanca, if you've seen that, seem like a Disney film. And he's in his apartment there over those next few months, and he's reflecting back on his life. He's 49 years old at that point. And he was a newspaperman by profession. And he realizes that his life, his remarkable life, has probably a lot of interest to the reading public. And so he starts typing. And he's typing over several months. And 80 years later, Christine shows me a stack of paper, 120 pages. And it's her grandfather. And I read it, and I'm just amazed at the story. And I become an instant fan. And so Christine and I have sort of, after some discussion, decided that we wanted to fulfill his wish of bringing his story to the public. And this is actually our first time trying to do that. So I'm going to tell you there are 4 inspiring moments in his life, and I'm going to identify them to you. The 4th one is actually the most dramatic, so I hope you pay attention. And the other thing I would say about his life is he managed to be part of just about every military, political, and cultural event and movement of the 20th century. So for those history buffs amongst you, this is like a tour of the 20th century. So without further ado, let's start out. And I think one of the interesting things about his life is the contrast between where he began and where he ended up. He was born in 1892 and grew up in a little town in New Hampshire, Peterborough, New Hampshire. There's a picture of it on the right. You can see some horse-drawn carriages. He grew up on a farm. They had horses, hogs, cows, and some crops. One interesting thing that was to have a big impact on his life was that his family had immigrated from Quebec. And so he spoke French at home. There were not child labor laws in the turn of the century. So at a very early age, he was working in a blacksmith shop, and he became very comfortable with horses, and he also became quite strong, I think, from the labor there. At the age of 15, and again, you know, he joined the National Guard, Cavalry Unit A. You think age 15, that's kind of young, but those were different times. And then at age 18, he went to college. And interestingly, the blacksmith that he worked for was the one who paid for him to go to college.
What college?
It's the New Hampshire State College, which I think became University of New Hampshire. In 1916, the National Guard was federalized to deal with Pancho Villa. So this guy, he went down to the Texas border to deal with that. He was a 2nd lieutenant. And I want to just point out something here. So this is a National Guard unit, which means it's all a bunch of neighbors going together. And so I presume these are all his neighbors. He's the officer, but they're the troopers. But look at this guy here, no hat. Look at this guy here, his hat sort of cockamamie. Look at the shoulders on this guy. And look at Daniel. And clearly there's something a little different about him already at this age. So they get back from the border in March of 1917, and very shortly after, the U.S. goes into World War I, and his unit is federalized again. and they're converted into a machine gun unit. And Daniel, at that point, is promoted to first lieutenant. He was in the 26th Division, which was the first division to land in France on the American side. And he was in all the major battles. He was injured. He was hospitalized from a shell concussion. Later on, he was gassed, and then he also had the Spanish flu, which landed him in the hospital. And the war ends in November 1918. Towards the end of the war, he was put into more headquarters roles because of his language abilities and the ability to liaise with the French. And in November, he was detached from the 26th Division to the 78th Division to help them be billeted in a little town called Semur-en-Auxois, which you can see the village here. It's a medieval walled town. And so he was helping billet the troops among the French citizens. And there he met a nurse named Aline Tribouillard. And, you know, the guys always go for the nurses. And so did he. And, of course, what happens, they married and had 2 children. So here he is here, and here's the children there. He leaves the Army, doesn't want to go back to the States, and he joins the newspaper, the International Herald Tribune. And for those who grew up before those kind of newspapers disappeared because of the internet, the International Herald Tribune was a big deal in Europe. He was initially hired as circulation manager, which meant that, because the International Herald Tribune, although it was edited in Paris, was distributed through all the European capitals. And so his job was to first try and get more circulation in all the European capitals, and also the logistics of getting the paper to all those places on time. And so it meant that he traveled all over Europe. He eventually rose to number 2 position at the paper. That's him over there. And this is again where he just through good fortune. In the interwar years, I would think there's an argument that Paris was sort of the cultural center for the West. And there was a few reasons for that. There were 2 million US soldiers who went to France during World War I. And when those soldiers came back, they talked a lot about what they saw, about Paris, and it created a lot of fascination in the American public for going into France. And as a result, there developed a very large expatriate American community there. Another reason was there was no prohibition in France. So if drinking was part of your idea of a fun time, maybe New York wasn't your place. So they had their own version of the Roaring Twenties. It was called Les Années Folles. And it was a place of intellectual ferment. Hemingway was there, Fitzgerald was there, Joyce, Picasso. I mean, you're familiar with Josephine Baker, jazz. Lindbergh landed in Paris. And Daniel, as a newspaperman, was in the middle of this. He was there when Lindbergh landed. It took him to every corner of Europe. This is the Café du Dôme, and that's a place where the International Herald Tribune newspapermen used to hang out, but it was also a favorite place for the expatriate community, the Hemingways and stuff. We've got reason to believe that he actually knew Hemingway. And intellectuals were there, so he was sort of right in the mix of all that stuff. His life was good. We had a prosperous job. He had, on the weekends and holidays, he would go with his family back to Burgundy in Semur to visit with Aline's family.
What was she wearing?
Communion, yes.
That's your mother.
My mother's first.
Yeah.
Oh, that's your mother's first communion.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even I wore some. a bride of Christ.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that.
So the 1930s, everything changed. The party was over. The expatriate community declines. The Nazis come to power. Daniel was there. He witnessed the beginning of the brown shirts. He was in Vienna when the Anschluss happened. And one of the things that's not really talked about that much is how France had a lot of the same kind of trends that were present in Germany, Italy, and Spain, which all went fascist. There's a lot of reasons why they don't talk about it, but that's sort of a fact. The Depression led to people on the left calling for radical change, saying that the market economy doesn't work, it doesn't function, we need something like what the Soviet Union has. And some of those people were inspired by or even directed by the Stalin internationalist. On the right, there were several parties that were aiming to replace parliamentary government. And what was on their mind was there was lots and lots of strikes because of Marxist ideas in the unions. There were also militias on the left and the right that were creating violence in the streets. And the perception of the people on the right was that democratic processes were incapable of dealing with the issues that their society was facing. In February 1934, there was what's called the Veterans Riots in Paris. It was a very big deal. 30,000 demonstrators from the far right attacked Parliament. 17 people were killed and 2,000 were injured. 3 days later, the far left staged a counter demonstration and 9 people were killed. And Daniel was injured covering those riots. And these riots were very controversial. On the right, you can see the cavalry here charged by the police. The right was incensed that some of the demonstrators who were veterans wearing their medals were shot. The left viewed this as a push, just like Hitler had tried to do in Munich back in the 20s. So it's interpreted very differently by the left and the right. In 1936, the left wins the elections. So at least at that moment, you would say that France avoided going fascist. But if you look to what happens later, there's a straight line from the people on the right who did those demonstrations and who had those beliefs to the Vichy government. So you could say that for a period of time that the right, the fascist things that were present in Germany's, Italy, and Spain were also succeeded in some manner or fashion in France. In the 30s, although the world outside was really an awful time for their personal life, Daniel and Aline, life was unchanged, but that was all about to change. September 1939, World War II was declared, and I think many of you probably know there was this, what they called the phony war for a period of time. Of course, at the beginning, no one knew that, so Daniel and Aline decided that Paris was at risk of being bombed from the air, so they agreed that Aline and the children would go to Saumur, which is, you can see here's Paris and here's Saumur, to be safe from potential bombing by the Germans. Daniel had a job to do. He continued to work in Paris, but he would come home or go visit the family on the weekends and did things because his military background was always present in his mind. He helped build air shelters for them in the house they were in. And then in May 1940, of course, the actual offensive began. Everyone is surprised by the speed with which the French army collapses. Nothing like the experience in World War I. And Daniel realizes his miscalculation. And what does he do? he's got a problem. How does he reach his family 160 miles away in Samira? The phone lines are cut, so he can't speak with them. The trains, if they run at all, are being bombed. The roads are clogged with refugees. And those refugees are intermixed with French units retreating and going forward to the front, and with supply convoys, and so they're all being bombed by the Germans.
Was he still with the Herald Tribune back then?
Yes, he was.
Oh, right.
Yes, he was. And that was one of the things that kept him in Paris. The readership obviously declined when it was getting close to combat, but as almost like a patriotic duty, they wanted to keep the paper going as a public service. So he stayed there. Actually, the head of the Paris office became ill, and so he had to manage things in the last months as head. So at any rate, the German army is between him and his family. So what does he do? On June 13th, one day before the Germans arrive in Paris, he decides he's going to walk to Samira. So this is inspiring moment number one. And you can see that here's Paris, and here's Samira, and he starts walking like this, trying to avoid the German offensive and then going east. And you can see Switzerland's down here. So he's basically walking halfway to Switzerland. During this walk, there's, you could say, three phases. There's the walk before he reaches the line of combat, there's the line of combat, and then there's when he passes through. Before he reaches the line of combat, he's oftentimes with columns of refugees, and he writes in his memoirs of horrific things. Because he's a military man, he has better instincts how to deal with a bomb coming down. So there were bombs that came down that killed people all around him, but he always seemed to know where to jump to be protected. There was one situation where there was a fuel truck at the top of a hill with cars all behind it. Traffic was not moving much, and the town where this was all happening was bombed at that moment, and shrapnel hit the fuel truck, and fuel started leaking, and it caught fire. And so, but he managed to get out, but other people didn't. And then he has an account of passing through the lines of combat. It's a lengthy account, but I'll just read you a couple lines. There was still a group of French soldiers resisting. They had 2 pieces of 75 millimeter artillery, and suddenly 4 light tanks, German tanks, broke cover and dashed towards the group. 3 of the tanks were blown up. As we later retreated, we found the body of the officer commanding this French group. And he says the fighting had taken a great toll among the civilians there. A number of young children, women, and elderly were lying dead. So, let me just before I go there. So that's him passing through the lines. This moment that I just described, and then after he gets through the lines, the German wanted to move the civilians off the roads to allow for free movement of their troops and their logistics. So he, at one point, with several hundred other refugees, are pushed off the road into a open field, and they're fenced in and not allowed to move by the Germans. And here he shows another aspect of his character. He was always very bold and brazen, and so he's there, and he goes to the commander of this little, several hundred people who are being guarded, and he says, "I'm an American. Your rules of war for dealing with these these are enemy non-combatants. The French are enemy non-combatants." He says, "I'm not an enemy non-combatant. We're not at war with you." And he says, "You can't hold me back." And at first, the sergeant tells him to get lost. But then he goes to his commander. He's still in this sort of prison area. And the commander takes it up to the next one up and the next one up. And apparently, the Germans don't want any diplomatic issues with Americans. So it goes back down the line of control, and he's let out. All the French are left there. And he tries his trick over and over again, and it works. So he's only 2 days into his journey when the Germans enter Samura. This is the town square in Samura where the Germans are entering. Of course, Daniel doesn't know this, but he's desperate to know what is happening. So he's 3 weeks on the road, and honestly, I think this 3 weeks could be a movie all by itself. But finally he arrives in Samura, and his family's safe, but the Germans who he had played a part in defeating in World War I are now billeted in his, the home of his, Eileen's family. And so that was not a happy thing for him to deal with. So as I said, the U.S. is not in the war at this point, and his entire family has U.S. passports. So he's spared the worst of things. And he's, as I said, he's very bold. There was a lake nearby where a lot of people had little boathouses, and they would have canoes and all kinds of things there. And the Germans had taken over this area for recreation for their troops. And he wanted to go and get his stuff back in one of the boathouses. And so they wouldn't let him onto the lake. So he went up to the commander, the German commander in Samura, and said, you know, I'm a U.S. citizen. You can't, none of these rules apply to me. And they went up the German command structure and then came back down again, and they said, okay, you can get your stuff. So he goes to the lake, and he gets his stuff out of his lake house. And he's leaving, and the security guard says to him, as he's leaving, says, Heil Hitler. And he responds, Hail Roosevelt. So in December of 40, he goes to Paris to just check on his apartment. And he's picked up by the...
When they're built in his house, where's his family? Are they there as well?
yeah, they're there. So they had to move into just sleep on the lower floors, and the Germans had the upper floors.
How does he get back to Paris?
By that point, the trains are working.
The trains are running, okay.
Yeah. So he goes to Paris. He's checking on his apartment, and probably somebody reported him as, for some reason, and he's picked up by the police and interred in an enemy non-combatant internment camp. And this is the camp where he was interred. This is a photo from the 1950s, but that's what it looked like. And enemy non-combatants were like if you were a British citizen and you were in Paris, you were picked up as, you're not a part of the British Army, but you are considered a enemy non-combatant, and they imprisoned you all. So all the families, elderly, were put in there, and conditions were pretty bad. But Daniel, being Daniel, he says, this doesn't apply to me. And it goes up the command, and then back down the command, and then eventually gets out. He was there actually longer than the other places. He was there for like 4 weeks. And after that, he's decided that it's time to take his family out, and he heads to Portugal and then takes a ship to New York City. And that's where he starts writing.
Portugal was neutral at that time, right?
Yes.
There were Germans there, though. There were German officers.
Yeah, there were Germans in Portugal and Spain, just like kind of in the movie Casablanca, but it was neutral, so you could have British military men sitting at a table in a restaurant right next to German military men. Okay, so in 41, Daniel and his family arrive in New York City. He gets a job at the Herald Tribune in New York, and he starts giving speeches about and writing articles about why the French army collapsed. And he's also giving talks about how the Germans do the occupation, how they do military government. December of 1941, he enters the war, and inspiring moment number 2. This is incredible. In November of 42, Daniel re-enlists. So think of that. You know, he's got his wife and 2 kids who speak very little English, and somehow he decides it's a good idea for him to go. Now he's already been in war. He's been 2 deployments. You know, one in the Texas border, one in World War I. He's been wounded. He's done his duty to his country, but there's something about his sense of duty that is outsized compared to an average person. So he goes, and when he enlists, he has every expectation that he would be put in a combat role. But it turns out that that's not what they value in him. They quickly learn that he's a kind of a quantitative person, and he's learned a lot from observing the German occupation. Like the Germans, it's kind of a science occupation. The Germans, for instance, in order to encourage people to deal with them, they created something called an occupation Reichmark. And they printed them, and they would pay merchants in France with these occupation Reichmarks. And the merchants were obligated to take them, and they would take them to their bank and deposit them, and the banks were obligated to convert them into French francs. And the exchange rate was very, very largely favorable to the Germans. And through this manner and other manners, the Germans were able to initially take about 25% of the GDP of France towards their effort, and towards the last year, I think it was like up to 50%. So it's a science, and you know the goal of military government is not to wipe out the people. It's actually you want the economy to do well because you want your army to live off the land, so to speak. So at any rate, within a couple of months of him enlisting, the Army has him teaching a course on military government and how to do an occupation based on what he learned from the Germans. He's deployed to North Africa and eventually follows the troops into Italy, where he leverages his expertise in occupation. In 1945, the war ends. Daniel's now in major, and he's ready to go home. He's done his duty. Post-war Europe, though, is still on edge. There's some people who think that there's the potential for the Allies to fall apart. That the Allies, the West would end up in some sort of conflict with the Soviet Union. And I think we all know about tensions like in '48 with the Berlin situation, with the Berlin airlift, where the Soviet Union was quite aggressive in trying to expand territorially. Now, Daniel has unique skills. He's fluent in English, French, Italian, and basic German. Through all his work across Europe, he's able to get things done. He can get things done through people, and he's got proven diplomatic skills. At this time, you'll remember the famous Iron Curtain speech. Winston Churchill, he said, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent. Well, Daniel wants to go home, but the government beseeches him to go to Trieste, that Winston talks about, which was like Germany. It was divided between the occupying powers. You had the French there, you had the British there, you had the Americans, and it was the Yugoslav army, which was communist aligned. And there was a border dispute. It was a very tense situation. And he reluctantly agreed to go there as sort of again, sense of duty. And then in '49 and '51, he's asked to go to Austria for the same thing. It's the same situation. All the four powers are there, tense situation, what's going to happen. At this point, he realizes he's too old now to get back into the private sector, so he says he's going to just finish up his working career in the military. And he goes on to Korea, which is unbelievable. So he was in Korea for 52, 53. When you consider his first deployment was 1916, that's quite something. So he retires as a lieutenant colonel from the Army. So because, just to sort of put an emphasis on the point that he seems to be everywhere that things are going on, you heard of the movie The Monument Men. Well, he was associated with that too. There was this is a guy named Dean Keller, who Daniel worked with, and Dan Keller was extremely appreciative of the assistance that Daniel Mahoney gave him doing his work. All right, so I promise the most dramatic point is this last one, and that was Daniel was actually orphaned. And this is the orphanage where he stayed briefly, and incredibly, he was sent on an orphan train. You probably may have heard of those. So when you think of all he accomplished in his life, you know, you say to yourself, wow, it's quite something.
You said he grew up on a farm in New Hampshire. That was not his parents' farm.
That was his foster parents. So his foster parents were Mr. and Mrs. Jarvis. And they fostered Daniel simply to do good. You know, I'm sure that some people used these orphan-trained children for labor and those kind of things. That was not them. They had 4 grown children. They had only a modest income, but Daniel felt loved by Mrs. Jarvis. Mr. Jarvis was a little bit severe, but he did well in that environment.
Did they take in his siblings as well?
No, his sibling, his 2 sisters were adopted right away, and his brother went on the orphan train with him and was in the same town but a different family. And it puts Ken McLeod, the blacksmith who paid for his college, in a different light. Daniel called him uncle. And I think, you know, those were bad times, and yet there's a lot of good people and a lot of good things happened to support Daniel through that. And I think there's some echo of that today. You know, you could say we're going through tough times, but I think there's lots of good people too. I think we can take that story from Daniel's life and say that is probably still true today. There are good people probably here. And I think Daniel, I think, would have made a great Rotarian. So,
How did his parents die?
you know, in those days, there was a lot of disease.
Illness, yeah.
Yeah, and if you were really unfortunate, it could wipe out both sides. So I think he's an interesting life to look at. Through his life, you can see all the events of the 20th century, obviously stories of remarkable feats and courage. He had this outsized sense of duty, and he was willing to make personal sacrifice for that sense of duty. And he had successful careers in business and military. He had an inspirational example for us of the ability to overcome obstacles. All of us face obstacles all the time, and I think he can give us inspiration there. But I also think it's an inspirational story of the people around him. You know, the Jarvises, the church that placed him with the Jarvises. I think there's inspiration there for all of us. So that's it. I don't know if there's any questions.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think that's an African military hat. that I think he's wearing, and that's what, the Boy Scouts adopted that because Baden-Powell was in Africa, and it's really to keep the sun off you, and then obviously, rangers, you have our national park rangers too, but I think it's originally an African military hat.
Where did he spend his retirement? Like,
He, you want to talk about him?
Yeah, he basically followed us everywhere. And we lived on Long Island at first, and then we moved to Westport, Connecticut, where I grew up. And he had an apartment on Long Island, and then we moved to Westport. He followed us. He wanted to be near us. He was my nanny.
Are you gonna write the book? I mean, this is amazing.
Yeah,
The details are unbelievable.
yeah, we're writing a book about this.
His trek to Saumur from Paris, he brought a 15-year-old boy with him he found on the road.
Yeah, he was very generous. On that trip, he didn't have food. I mean, he was living off the land kind of for 3 weeks, but he met people less fortunate than him, mothers with children and stuff, and he would give them his food, and he helped
Then he
this
took
child.
it someplace else.
Yeah,
Yeah, the Herald Tribune was, when I was growing up, it was the authoritative newspaper, English newspaper in Europe. I mean,
Yeah.
It covered Europe like no other newspaper, I think, really, in English language.
yeah.
I have a couple of questions. What about his wife? Like when he was deployed to Korea and he was going to Vietnam, like was she in America the whole time, or did she join him at some point? What was she doing? Like was she working or?
When she was in the U.S.?
Yeah.
Well, when she was in the U.S., they went and they stayed with some of his best friends in New Hampshire, and then they moved to New York City because my mother got a job with the Office of War Information at the Voice of America, and she worked as a feature writer, and she was a voice on the radio. And my grandmother, because they didn't have very much money then, she didn't really speak English, and she worked at Bonwood Teller as a saleswoman. And then eventually my mother was married to another, a naval officer, and they moved to Long Island. But my grandmother, she just stuck with the family.
I read some correspondence. For instance, when he was in Vienna, it was a possibility to try and bring Aline to Vienna, but he didn't feel it was safe. So,
I know she traveled to Hamburg by herself to see her furniture off
Yeah,
in the United States. I mean, my grandmother, she was a very independent, tough woman, very Victorian in her upbringing, so she knew what she had to do.
So he never lived under the Vichy government. He'd gone to Portugal by then?
no, he was under the Vichy government. For those 7 months that, under the occupation that he was there, he was under the Vichy government. Yeah.
He was really disappointed because he thought that General Pétain was really such a war hero in the First World War, and then he was crushed by the
was a
German
collaborator,
occupation. That's right.
Yeah. Wonderful. Terrific story.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
One more question. You have a question?
I'm just very curious. So when he was on the road coming from Paris going to Saumur, where was he sleeping? Like, was he taking shelter in people's homes, or was he sleeping in fields?
He was sleeping in fields and mostly in people's barns. He would find a barn. And some people would chase him away because they were afraid that he might have been part of the retreating army, but some of them took him in and fed him. So,
Well, thank you, Rick. That's
Amazing.
I look forward to reading the book.
I see a movie here.
Yeah, me too.
I totally see a movie.